Since the Senate bowed to popular demand for the electronic transmission of election results, several civil society groups in the country have been jubilant. Prior to this week's U-turn by the upper legislature, civil society organizations had carried out protests and mounted pressure on the Senate to yield to the demands of the people. This they did with the aid of the Nigerian media, in which Arise News Channel played a prominent role. Yet, while some CSOs see the U-turn by the Senate as a victory for all, others see it as a first step in the repositioning of the nation's democracy. It also remains to be seen if President Muhammadu Buhari will give his assent to the Electoral Act Amendment Bill or not. Joining us now from Abuja to discuss what more needs to be done to strengthen the nation's democratic institutions is Clement Nwankwo, Executive Director at the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, who will also be telling us how civil society intends to work with INEC to ensure that it has adequate IT infrastructure and support to transmit elections electronically nationwide in the next general election. Welcome to the show, Mr. Nwankwo, and good morning.
Good morning, Trudun, Rafai, and Ruben. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this.
Yes, and thank you for joining us. Very quickly, how significant, in your view, is the vote for us by the Senate with regard to that contentious Clause 52, subsection 3, with regard to the capacity of INEC to transmit results electronically, beginning with the Anambra gubernatorial elections in November?
Thank you very much, Ruben. And I must begin by saying commendations to the Senate for, again, going back and reviewing what it had passed. I think it takes a lot of introspection and courage to do so, and the Senate has done quite well, even going beyond some of the expectations that we all had with respect to what they had initially passed. I think when you look at what the Senate and the House has passed, and hopefully during harmonization, you would be able to, between both versions, get sections or clauses that reinforce each other to give us an even more stronger legislation that strengthens our legislative process and our election process. And it's also commendable. I was listening to my good friend Festus Okoye speaking earlier, and his point about how far INEC has gone. And for a lot of us who have followed the electoral process in Nigeria, we do know that INEC has gone really way ahead in terms of its own thoughts about how to improve the use of technology, reduce the human element in elections, and make the electoral process more credible. And looking towards the Anambra elections, where we're going to be seeing, and INEC needs to understand that it's going to be in a spotlight, we're all going to be seeing how INEC deploys for Anambra. And I think that for us in civil society, looking at INEC, looking at the electoral process, of course, all of the work that we do is aimed at strengthening the electoral process, strengthening the institutions participating in elections, even the political parties. So for INEC, while we will be working to strengthen it, we'll also be keeping a close eye to see whether all of the things that Festus has said in your earlier interview, and all of the things that INEC continues to say about how it has improved, our eyes would be open. And the media, I do know, and I know that Arise has actually even gotten very much involved in a number of elections with the debates already started. So I think we'll all keep our eyes open. We'll all see what INEC is doing. We will observe with the purpose of coming back to INEC to say that, yes, you have kept to your words, you've met expectations, or pointing out where there has been shortcomings. So all eyes are going to be on Anambra. But more importantly, we all are looking forward to the president, the harmonization process completing in the coming days. We hope that the National Assembly understands that we are now on full throttle. The harmonization needs to conclude quickly, and the bill transmitted to the president for assent. The president, I understand, has indicated willingness to assent as quickly as possible, and we hope that that's what happens.
Right, now that we're actually at the cusp of having, credible elections, assuming, of course, like you've observed, the National Assembly and President Muhammadu Buhari do as we hope, what else do you think needs to be addressed urgently in our electoral process?
I think that, and that's really where the controversy is a little bit now, but I would say that let's see how this works out. The politicians are constantly in their own shenanigans and trying to see how the system protects them. And that's why you see both houses of the National Assembly pass an electoral bill that indicates only direct primaries. I think that when you look at the political parties, you understand that there are questions about internal democracy within these parties. Candidates emerge arbitrarily. The processes that the law define, the processes that their constitution and guidelines define are most times not respected. So I think that a focus also needs to be on the political parties. If we are to have candidates who are going to represent expectations that citizens have of good candidates, then I think that we all need to hold political parties to account and to respect their internal democracy processes and their constitutions and their rules. So for us in civil society, and I also believe sharing that partnership with the media, that we all understand that there is an important need to keep an eye on the parties so that they will respect their processes and give to Nigerians candidates that they can choose from.
All right. I just want to know your thoughts about the weaponization of cash in our electioneering process. As we're coming close to the 2023 election, it's going to play a very fundamental factor in all of this, and we can't run away from it. And the politicians are increasing their arsenal by the day. So I want to know your thoughts around that, and I also want to know your thoughts around voter apathy. I mean, the Anambra election's coming up now. We have an incumbent problem of voter apathy. It will happen. We envisage that already, based on the security scenarios in the state and what is happening, and all of that. And that has always been the case. Voter participation have dropped year on year in this country. The last election was a paltry less than 40 or 30%, I should say, the numbers in the country of voter participation. Your thoughts on those two things?
Thanks, Rufai. I think it's always a major issue when you look at the political parties and their ability to engage the voters, engage the electorate. And I think that's why the more you go electronic, the more you see the benefits of it, that you would have a voters register where names are available, names are known. Politicians, political parties can go and approach the voters. In advanced democracies, you would receive materials, campaign materials right at your doorstep, even if there are rallies and campaigns on the streets. So I think that technology will help us to achieve that. We need to get voters to come out, and voters need to understand that there is a good significance to their coming out to vote. You can't be complaining about the quality of politicians, quality of officials, when you have been apathetic regarding coming out to cast your votes and fulfill your civic responsibilities. In some countries, in fact, it's mandatory that you vote, but I think here we don't have that, and I think that citizens need to understand a key element to their participation in voting, which is, or benefit to that, which is that they can join in selecting or electing candidates that will fulfill some of their expectations. But again, I think that when you look at the security situation around the country, and Anambra is going to be a key thing, I think we all are asking the question, why has Anambra escalated in insecurity in recent weeks ahead of the elections? Who is responsible for it? Is it a political strategy by some fifth columnists to achieve that nature of environment for elections in a way that reduces the turnout for elections? Is it combining with the other elements or other issues that are going on in the Southeast and in Anambra that has in itself affected the way that, or will affect the way that citizens turn out? So I think that a lot of work needs to be done to help to achieve citizens' turnout for the elections. Yes, there are issues regarding the influence of money in elections, and I think that the Electoral Act continues to try to understand how best to handle this, but it's also a question of enforcement. How do you ensure that politicians do not abuse the use of money in elections and do not pay cash directly to voters? This would be a criminal offense, but the question is always, how do you enforce it? INEC continues to say we do not have the resources, we do not have the capacity to hold electoral offenders to account. So I think a lot of work would need to be done to be able to ensure that the laws, the offenses prescribed in the Electoral Act are enforced and persons who are breaching this are held and brought to account.
Well, I mean, some other issues came up at that, position, at that last meeting, major meeting by the Senate on electoral issues. The other issue is Clause 87, about direct and indirect primaries and the controversy that has generated. What are your thoughts on that? Because, the PDP says it's opposed to it. Members of the APC say, look, direct primaries will seem to be the best option. And then there are other issues that civil society will need to focus on as a way of further deepening the electoral bill or the Electoral Act, which may not have been addressed, because there's also that unresolved issue, unaddressed issue of diaspora voting or independent candidacy. What do you think should be the next line of advocacy, particularly for civil society groups?
Thank you, Ruben. I think that when you look at the provisions of Clause 87, and it's not a clause that hasn't been operated before, in Section 87 of the existing Electoral Act, there are provisions for direct and indirect primaries. And all of the parties, APC, PDP, have at different stages operated direct and indirect primaries. And always it's at the National Assembly that these issues come up, where members of the National Assembly, I've seen them in action in debate on these issues. This is not an influence from anyone. It's from within the National Assembly. It's members of the National Assembly thinking within themselves, how do they ensure that the nature of control of the electoral process by governors in the states are kept in check? And so they often tweak and try to see how they can protect themselves. And that's why Section 87 will always be a conversation during conversations around electoral reform. But I think we've gone past that now. I think that the National Assembly has indicated quite firmly, and both houses have passed the same provisions regarding direct primaries. So it's really a question that we now go for implementation. And we will see how that implementation happens. So we'll take lessons from it. And if there is a need to revisit the issue, I'm sure the National Assembly will be well placed to do so after the elections. But we are past a debate on that at this time. But again, the whole emphasis, and that's what civil society continues to talk about, the whole emphasis about getting parties to respect their internal processes, to keep those who are in the leadership of the political parties within check and within respect of the internal processes of their parties. Yes, there are several issues. Diaspora voting is one of them. And when you look at the conversations around diaspora voting, it is a deep conversation. Diaspora is not just Europe and America. Diaspora is Benin Republic, is Niger Republic, it's Sudan, it's Ghana. There are lots of Nigerians all over the world. So there is going to have to be deep conversation about how you can manage the large population of Nigerians outside of the country who would like to participate in voting during general elections. I think it's going to be a continuing conversation. But ahead of the 2023 elections, my sense is that it has missed the train. It would come back after the elections in 2023, and hopefully there is some mechanism worked out that allows Nigerians from all over the world who would like to vote in Nigeria or within for the elections in Nigeria to participate in it. But I must also point out that in terms of actual voting, we have to come back again, and I listened to Festus Okoye talking about what the Z-PAD achieves, bimodal mechanism achieves, and so on. There are also provisions within the law that regards how you collate the votes, and I think always, you know, when I was convener of a situation room, that was always coming up in the reports that we issued from the civil society situation room about collation of election results being a weak link in the electoral process. Again, I think it's something to interrogate with INEC about how technology that is now permitted under the new Electoral Act would help to reduce all of the concerns that we have continuously expressed about collation, and how the collation process can also be made very, very transparent. And when someone votes in a polling unit and you upload that information on the internet immediately, how does all of these spread out to ensure that the collation process across all of the elections, across all of the different stages, reflect in transparency and an accountable electoral process? So there's a lot of work to do, but yes, I agree that we are on a trajectory that indicates that our election is set to improve.
And on the topic of campaign finance, again, you know, the Electoral Amendment Bill raises the ceiling, but doesn't really address how INEC can properly, and even CSOs like yourself, can properly monitor campaign spending. Because the argument has always been, when you have that limit, how do you then assess what duration the campaign period was? Because it could be argued that some have started campaigning now. It could be argued that no, we're not in fact campaigning. We haven't bought a form. Everybody is just, you know, touting our name. So how do you think that legislation can be passed to cover that and ensure that there is more of a level playing field, if at all that's possible?
Thank you, Tundun. I think it's always a concern, is a question, and that's why when the Justice Mohammed Lawal Uwais Electoral Reform Committee did its work, it recommended the creation of an Electoral Offences Commission. That commission was further recommended in the committee that was set up by President Buhari, that was the Constitutional Electoral Reform Committee, headed by former Senate President Clement Nwankwo. All of these recommendations have been there. The Senate has passed the bill, Electoral Offences Commission bill. INEC, I think, is the challenge right now, because INEC says, look, we want to be focused on elections and conducting elections. The issue of enforcement of electoral offenses and apprehending offenders is something that we are not prepared to handle at this time, or nor are we equipped to handle at this time. So I think that it makes really necessary the argument and appointment of an Electoral Offences Commission, and I think the National Assembly should drive this and bring this about. Campaign finances are always everywhere in the world difficult to track, because there are different mechanisms, and in Nigeria here, there are different processes where you see people setting up and contributing to the funds of political parties, are trying to subvert the law. So you really have to have some kind of forensic system that sets up to identify how monies are contributed, who contributes what, how much is being spent, because sometimes when you look at even just television advertisements, you would see that it already exceeds the cost limits set in the Electoral Act. So there is a lot of work to be done. One, to keep down on individual or corporate contributions into campaign funds, and two, to ensure that the candidates themselves, the political parties themselves, do not exceed the limits already clearly stated in the law. So there's still a lot of work to do in that regard, and it would be continued advocacy for a lot of election watchers and observers.
Right. So I want to also get the civil societies or your read on the issue of election coverage, by journalists. That's a very important and veritable space, that we can deepen for the furtherance of elections. In other climes you have, more robust conversation, but here we're restricted. Things like exit polls and the likes, you don't have a lot of that here because our elections are still steeped in that history, sort of like that military-esque history, where things are still constricted. How can we open that conversation even further? And even the public debate space leading up to elections, you still see how candidates do disregard debates and, conversations, with the electorate and things like that. I mean, those are things that can really add to the electoral space, but we don't do a lot of that.
I agree with you. I think that the collaboration and collaboration, yes, between the media and civil societies is age-long in Nigeria. And Ruben, sitting there with you, was part of that collaboration between civil society, NGOs now, then, and the media, when we saw that collaboration lead to a major struggle against military dictatorship in Nigeria. And we saw the results that it produced, that synergy, that collaboration was a very potent and positive one. And I think that as we continue on our search for the ideal implementation and practice of democracy in this country, that the synergy, the collaboration between the media and NGOs and civil society needs to even build stronger. Debates are mandatory in some democratic climes. A candidate would not dare
but why is it not mandatory
abandon
here?
a debate or refuse to attend a debate.
Sorry to cut you in, I said, but why is it not mandatory here?
It's always a challenge when you do that.
I said, but why is it not?
We don't have any law we don't have any law that makes it mandatory. It is in this country a voluntary thing. And sometimes what you find is when politicians have worked out their own strategies for winning elections, debates become a distraction. And again, it goes to the quality of political parties and the candidates that they throw up. And you would see that a lot of times when candidates don't go for debates, it's because they are worried that it might expose their weaknesses and their underbellies. So quite frankly, I think that it's something that we need to strongly demand a system. And there is actually a law in the National Assembly, a bill in the National Assembly that's been slow in making the rounds to make debates mandatory and compulsory. But until we do have that bill passed, it will be a question what advantage anybody considers a debate for their campaigns.
Okay, quickly, in just 1 minute before we go. Are you optimistic that the president would assent to the bill as proposed? Or you think we're likely to have the same situation we had in 2019, and at the end of the day, the bill never saw the light of day?
No, I think the president would sign it. I think it was that was well pointed out in the Senate itself, revisiting the bill. The president is not contesting elections personally in 2023. He's not qualified to contest, and I think that the president himself had made the point that he wants to join President Jonathan in leaving a legacy of increased and improved electoral process for the country. So I don't see too much choice for him about assenting to the bill. I believe he will assent to it.
Well, thank you very much, Clement Nwankwo, for joining us on The Morning Show.